treasurer. Dr. Koch doesn't really need an introduction. He's been coming to us to give this presentation on the state of Hampton roads now. I think this is either our 14th or 15th year with you. As his resume that we had included in the email is extensive. He's internationally known. We were able to adjust our meeting date because Dr. Koch was asked to be a witness in a legal case in Seattle, so we had to change our meeting date. Marion Manor was willing to do that. He's produced the widely cited State of the Region report for Hampton Roads for many years, and he served as a consultant or an expert for over 50 legal firms, corporations, and universities. I don't want to take the time to go through his vita, which certainly you had access to through the email. It's extensive. What I would ask, you have cards on the table, and one of the things that we do have the video this time. We have access. So we would like you to let Dr. Koch get through his presentation. Those cards are, as things come up, you are free to write a question, pass them over to the table, and at the end, we'll allow him to, obviously we have time for him to answer those questions, but we'd like to get through the presentation, which sometimes in the past has been difficult because of questions. So we welcome Dr. Koch. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I think it's like actually 15 or 16 years, but it goes back a long time, and I always enjoy these sessions with you. I wouldn't be here without these individuals. I do get some public support from the university, but if you see any of these people, I've got them on the back, and some of them, of course, are residents of the beach. This is my disclaimer. I always have to make this. Don't beat up on John Broderick or anybody on the Board of Visitors for anything they say. They're not responsible for anything I say. This is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about essentially our big three, defense spending, the port, tourism, and then talk about a couple of interesting sort of economic policy topics. And then, of course, we'll deal with questions. The theme of this year's presentation is almost, you could ask the question, have I seen this movie before? Because it's pretty much this year, the same as last year in terms of our economic growth is going slower than the nation as a whole. Indeed, if you look at job recovery, we have yet to recover all of the jobs we lost in the Great Recession. We're still down about 10,000 jobs below we were in 2008. That's regionally, okay? And Virginia's recovered, the United States has recovered. They recovered roughly, they got back to the same level after about 78 months. We're not yet recovered. So we're growing more slowly. We're the red guys here, and our estimate is this year in 2016, we're going to grow at 1.38%, whereas when we talk about the country as a whole, 1.82%, although recent developments have maybe caused that estimate to go down a bit. They might be a little bit less than we thought. Civilian employment, I just mentioned, we're about 10,000 jobs below our peak. If we go back to 2007, we had 775,000 jobs in the region. Now we've got 765, and we've been recovering, but it's very, very slow. Against that, though, it's interesting that when you look at wage increases over the 2007 to 2015 period, look at these percentage points. The wage increases have been greater than the increase in the CPI. CPI has gone up about 16%, and you can see that in most occupations, except when we're talking about retail trade and educational services and so forth, which are going more slowly, people's real incomes are going up. Okay, I'm going to get back to this because some of these things don't sort of compute very well with each other. They seem to be contradictory. It also turns out that we look at household income, and that's what we're looking at here. Household income in Hampton Roads has been going up, and actually going up a little bit faster than the nation as a whole. Now, household income, though, involves multiple earners, multiple individuals, and that's been going up. Okay? Whoops. So, we're not growing very fast, or we're not creating a lot of jobs, but our wages and incomes are rising faster than prices, and our rate of unemployment is pretty low. So, how can this be? I mean, these seem like they don't make any sense. Well, let's go behind these numbers and see if we can't discover why this is so. Let's start with defense spending. What's the key? Well, sequestration is the key. And the question really now is, after the election, will they do a new deal in terms of adding a little bit more funding back to defense spending? If they don't, this is going to be what happens. This next year, we're going to have either a little bit of an increase or actually, sort of standing still or falling behind. Defense spending simply isn't going to go up. And what's even worse, maybe for Hampton Roads, is this is national defense spending. Defense spending in our region is probably going to decline slightly if we don't have some kind of a sequestration agreement. So, this is what's going to happen over the next few years in terms of defense spending. If you look at what's actually occurred, we had almost $20 billion of direct defense spending in the region 4 or 5 years ago. Now we're down a little bit from that, and basically what we're talking about is a fairly constant circumstance. Now, defense spending, of course, is very important to us in terms of its impact, and a major part of defense spending in the region is what is being paid to employees. Now, during the previous decade, after 9/11 and the like, DoD spending on people went up 6 or 7% a year, the total amount of money being spent within our region on people. But now it's really slowed down. So if you look between 2011 and 2012, for example, these percentages are lower, and I could put up more recent numbers, but basically we're seeing a real slowdown. So defense spending on individuals, in terms of salaries, in terms of fringe benefits, in terms of housing allowances and the like, has really tailed off. And that's been a major engine of stimulus for us. And there are other threats out there. One of the major threats is a change in the defense focus from the Atlantic to the Pacific. 3 defense secretaries in a row have talked about pivoting to the Pacific. The president talks about that. That would cost us an aircraft carrier group if it actually occurs. Each aircraft carrier group with all the ships and people around it is worth about $1 billion a year. Now, the size of our regional economy is about 90 billion. So think of an aircraft carrier group as being about 1% of the economy. But it's also true that when one gets deployed, we lose pretty much the same kind of spending. Some of it stays here. Maybe we only lose 2/3 of that 1% when they get deployed. But when those aircraft carrier groups leave, that really bites into the local economy. And we're talking then about automobile sales, home sales, pizzas, computers, you name it. Decentralization of DoD assets to other bases. And here I'm talking about the Jacksonvilles of the world and so forth. They'd like to have what we have. And the argument they make is that it's simply not safe to centralize certain assets here, that a low-yield nuclear bomb or other kinds of things could pin in the ships here and make it very difficult for the fleet to really operate. And so therefore, it's smart to decentralize ships and so forth throughout the Atlantic coast and maybe even into the Gulf. And, you know, you can make a plausible argument for that. Now, in order to decentralize, though, they have to build up facilities, and it would be expensive to do that. Our advantage is we have all this stuff in place. we're the largest Navy base in the world, and it would cost a lot to replicate that somewhere else. But, and I don't want this to be sort of a statement where I'm talking about the personalities per se, but when Randy Ford lost his election, we lost seniority. He was going to end up chairing a major subcommittee dealing with defense on the House Appropriations Committee. We don't have much seniority in Washington, D.C. now. We don't have a John Warner and people like that that can go in there and ensure that certain things don't happen, and even write into appropriations bills that you may not do certain things. We're at a low ebb, or similar to a low ebb in terms of our political clout in Washington, D.C. to prevent some of these things from happening. Okay. Now, another problem we have that I mentioned before is the rising price of aircraft carriers, submarines, and F-35 airplanes and things of that sort. They've risen so rapidly that we cannot afford to hire as many people. There's simply not as much money left over. We have almost 20,000 fewer active duty people in Hampton Roads now than we did, a little bit more than 10 years ago. So there's a trade-off between equipment and assets and people. And that's going to continue to be the case. I mean, the F-35, the tricked out versions of the F-35 airplane are $250 or $300 million. You know, and a P-51 Mustang in 1945 cost $50,000. Even when you adjust for inflation, we're only up to something like $5 or $10 million. So there's a complete difference there. Well, here's what this means. It means that at Oceana, they're not going to be able to afford as many airplanes over a period of time, and that means they're not going to need as many people. So the price of the assets is a real concern in terms of what happens in our region. And rising personnel costs, including those for veterans, the people who are owed the money, I'm not arguing that at all, I'm simply saying that's increasingly expensive, and that bites into what the Defense Department can do elsewhere. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the port. The port had a really good recovery out of the Great Recession. These are TEUs, you know, the 20-foot equivalent units that you see going around. Really good recovery, but if I put 2016 up here, you'd see it was just about like this. We've had a real slowdown, and the slowdown relates to what's happening in Europe, what's happening in China, what's happening in Latin America. The international economic slowdown is affecting our port. In fact, the percentage of empty TEUs going out from our port has gone up about 40% over the last year. Why are they empty? Because there isn't anybody out there who wants to buy what we want to sell, because their economies are not thriving. Okay? So the port has done very well. It's been an engine. It's maybe responsible for 7–8% of our regional economic activity. And it's been a good thrust engine for us, but that is sort of fading out. Here's its challenges. You know about this one. Anybody who, let's say, goes along Route 164 towards Suffolk, you see all those train cars lined up? They have real problems serving and handling the trucks, the train cars, and so forth, and in general, they have sort of a capacity problem. Now, the General Assembly this last session did allocate $350 million to do a lot of things that will improve their ability to handle cargo, and actually increase the number of TEUs that they can handle. That's really good for us because, again, the port is something that's pretty important to us. But there's also competition out here. New York, New Jersey is spending almost $2 billion raising the Bayonne Bridge. Those of you who know the area know how important the bridge is. Right now, the biggest tankers can't get underneath it. And so they're paying all this money to raise it up in the sky so that the big ships can go underneath. Right now they can't, and so we hold that advantage over them. Just as a little footnote, the Panama Canal is not a big deal. They finally got it open. But it can't really handle, even now with all the improvements, it can't handle the biggest ships. The biggest ships being constructed out there can hold 20,000 or 21,000 TEUs. The Panama Canal, it maxes out at about 10.5 or 11. And plus, it's so narrow, and they've got all, they have some personnel problems there and corruption problems. Lots of shippers from Asia, from the Pacific Rim, are choosing to go through the Suez Canal rather than the Panama Canal. So the opening of the Panama Canal is not going to be a big thing for us. The whole question of depth, we're a deep draft port. We can handle 50-foot drafts, but these bigger ships are coming along. We're going to have to scour out our port. That's going to be expensive. Selfishly, we hope that the feds are going to pay for a lot of that, and they probably will, especially when it's related to what's happening at the Navy base and so forth. But over a period of time, depth is going to be very important because that's an advantage to us. Now, number 4, I've actually just talked about. The slowdown in the world economy has slowed down the activity at our port. Okay, the third major pillar is tourism and hotels, which are very important in Virginia Beach. I want you to look at this particular table rather carefully. What this tells me is hotel revenues. How much is being collected from people who are staying? Hotel revenue as a percentage of personal income. Essentially, it's a measure of the slice of the pie accounted for by the motel industry. Okay? Look what's been happening at Hampton Roads. It's been going down. Hotels, motels in Hampton Roads, relatively speaking, proportionately speaking, are not as important as they used to be. Now you can see in the U.S., right around the recession, these went down, this bounced back, and it's higher. In Virginia, it went down and bounced back, but it's still not quite as high. What these two columns tell us is that hotel, motel traffic and revenue are highly sensitive to federal spending. That's really the lesson of those two columns. But these numbers also tell us that some of the reports that the state tourism people are putting out about how well hotels and motels are doing, that's Kool-Aid. And we've tried to follow this up at Old Dominion by saying, where did you get these numbers? And the answer is, there's a firm that has a proprietary model that generates these numbers. And we can't, of course, get their proprietary stuff. We have reason to believe, no proof, but I have reason to believe that the stuff they're putting out in Richmond, and maybe even in Virginia Beach, because they're based upon the same stuff, may not really correspond with the reality, because these numbers suggest that things aren't doing quite as well as they're being advertised. Now, this is not good for Hampton Roads. Virginia Beach, it turns out, is doing better than most. But if we look at the total hotel revenue in Hampton Roads, and these are millions of dollars, hotel revenue is higher than it was in the end of the Great Recession. But down these red things, that's real hotel revenue. That's after I've deflated for the CPI. Okay? Price adjusted hotel revenue is down. Okay? It was 344, and now it's 313. Once again, that tells us that, roughly speaking, the real price adjusted hotel revenue in Hampton Roads is down about 10%. Hasn't kept up. Okay? Here are hotel occupancy rates in Virginia Beach. Incidentally, all of these data come from Smith Travel, which is the reliable source nationally in terms of who's staying at hotels and so forth. And we do have a way to check this because I have to pay taxes, and so we sort of know who's staying where. But hotel occupancy rates in Virginia Beach are down. If we look at Virginia Beach in terms of rooms occupied, this is the number